He's bona fide. He's the real deal. He doesn't need to be that kind of person. So he's just. I think he's just confident and self-assured because he's like
in control. Knows what he's doing. So, Rebel Dread is a documentary about Don Letts, cultural mover and shaker, filmmaker, band member, actor, musician. My name is Phil Marriott. Welcome back. If you haven't subscribed, get to it. We are Boys on Film. Welcome back to Mr. Sean Vickers, lover of a documentary.
Love a documentary. Love one. You know me. Music, documentary, put them in the mix. Happiest person ever.
Yeah, and good storytellers. Have we got a good storyteller today, though? Don Letts.
Don Letts, genius. What a legend.
How much did you know about him before this documentary, though?
I knew a bit about him because it's so weird how worlds collide, isn't it? Because we were talking about STYRENE recently, you know, the documentary we talked about.
Yeah, that wasn't too long ago. It was about a year ago, wasn't it?
The influence of the Clash. And then very recently on Flopped, my podcast, I was talking about the Slits. I was talking about the formation of the Slits, their connections with the Clash. I was talking about Dennis Bovell, who was their producer. Obviously, Don Letts was their manager. So it's weird how all these worlds collide. And I loved that about this kind of period of time. I was talking about this with a good friend, like the way that people interacted in the late 70s, early 80s, and how people met each other is so bonkers. And how the interactions between these people that are now famous, culturally, you know, famous for us, how they interacted with each other and how they got to me, and it's bonkers. I just find it all really, really intriguing and interesting, and that's why this particular documentary I love, because it knits all of that kind of stuff together.
Yeah, and it's so weird you say about connections as well, because there's so much in this that I knew of, whether it was just bands that I liked or connections with where I've lived, because I once lived in Brixton and Don Letts grew up in Brixton. He was obviously part of that movement in the 70s, in the early 70s. And also he spoke about Andrew Jakowski as well, who used to own the Fridge in Brixton, where I used to go clubbing. And I used to meet him on the dance floor. I used to see him on the dance floor, and his wife, Susan, we used to dance like as part of the Love Muscle Club night. So there are lots of links and lots of kind of memories for me that came back after seeing this documentary, and I really loved it for that reason. That it was also finding out more about him, because I didn't necessarily know that much about him, and I feel like I know a bit more now.
Yeah, and you're right, that Brixton connection, because I lived in Brixton for 5 years. There were just many things that warmed my heart about this documentary, and he is so erudite and articulate about, you know, his past and his journey and his interactions, that I thought it flew by. The time flew by. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And as I say, like these knitting together of stories and acts and artists and movements and genres as it kind of merged between the 70s and the 80s is just phenomenal, you know, hanging out with Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren on the King's Road, and then, you know, next being the manager of the Slits, and then, you know, working on Big Audio Dynamite. There's so much, it's so rich.
He's an amazing storyteller, and I love the way you saw him kind of putting down photographs, almost like they were real photographs. Obviously they were used as part of that style, because it was very much the storyteller's process, wasn't it? Him with his memories and flicking through albums, and they kind of like recreated that whole kind of scene with him putting records on the record players. I liked the flow of it. It felt like it was a snappy pace.
And we've touched on this before, and it's from a different lens. The idea that punk was open to everyone. Punk was a movement for outsiders. The way that story interweaves with his experiences and with the reggae scene and with the music scene, I find that absolutely bonkers, you know. I find that, but incredible in equal measure, that, you know, these two kind of what would appear on the surface like poles apart music scenes and genres and tribes actually interwove. I find that absolutely thrilling and exciting, actually.
And I don't know about you, but I thought the people that were involved in the making of this documentary, the talking heads, I thought they told some really fascinating stories. We had former girlfriend Jeanette Lee, we had Mick Jones, Big Audio Dynamite, obviously, because Don Letts obviously a massive part of that band when they formed that band after the Clash. Paul Simonon, we had Desmond Coy, who's the older brother of Don, Leo Williams, Jazzy B, Norman J, John Lydon, Grace Letts, who of course is still with Don now, the wife of Don. And, some fascinating stories about his relationships as well, because, he led a double life for quite a while, for like 8 years when he was with his former girlfriend.
I find this idea as well, and I'm just not sure, maybe I'm an old cynic now, Phil, but I'm just not, this idea that he got involved in film, picked up an 8mm camera, started to film and record lots of things, which led him into, getting involved with some of the kind of proto video making for pop bands. I find all that just kind of incredible. It's almost a thing that sits in a film. It's almost not real how these things happen. But I find that brilliant, and I love the story where he got his first real big gig, and because I don't think he's not equity, but he wasn't part of the film guild. He had to basically direct a shadow director to do the film. I find that incredible, really. I think it's a brilliant story.
And there's some really good footage in there. I mean, you'll know that what I'm going to talk about is Susie and the Banshees, the footage they showed of them singing, performing Captain Scarlet as well. There's some footage that maybe you haven't seen before. I mean, there's a lot of photographs that I hadn't seen, particularly of Vivienne Westwood. I was speaking to Jeremy, my partner, about it. He said he'd seen those pictures, but I hadn't seen those. And obviously talks of him DJing at the Roxy, the big punk club in London, which was obviously where Andrew Tchaikovsky, asked him to DJ.
What was so interesting early on in the documentary is how he talked about David Bowie as an influence. And then there was a point later on when he was in New York where there's a photo of him and Bowie turned up at, I think, maybe a Big Audio Dynamite gig, and then they're backstage. And I was a bit like, I really would love to, that thing when never meet your heroes kind of thing. For me, there was like, is there a story there? I mean, I thought it was so rich as a documentary, but my brain was working overtime about some of those kind of interactions that were probably happening behind the scenes.
So it's almost like you wanted to know, because I wanted to know more about those stories. But I suppose there's only so much you can put into a documentary. This was, an hour and a half?
Yeah.
And that is another story in itself, isn't it? You could almost have a side project.
You could. No, totally. And I asked myself, why is this documentary not been made before, really? Because it's a real testament of, of someone's story, and also a music scene and a genre and a tribe and multicultural Britain, in the late 70s and the early 80s.
To be honest, I think he touched on that, because he did reference that. He said that, throughout his life, he's always been really busy, because he's kept himself busy doing various projects. And when he's done these projects, he's thrown himself completely into the work. And I think it's only now that he's kind of like reflecting on it. And I think he's always been too busy to even look back. I think he's just concentrating on the future.
If you're a music fan more generally, but if you love those kind of stories that, that kind of like, they're almost incredible, like narratives around, someone's lifetime across different musical genres, different locations, superstar, amazing cultural people, band. It's fantastic. I think they did such a good job with this documentary. And as I say, it was an hour and a half. The time flew by. It was absolutely
It did. And let's also remember that he looked amazing. I mean, he still does look amazing now, but back in the 70s and the 80s, he, particularly with his brother, brother was saying, but he used to wear makeup. It's that whole cross-pollination thing. It's like, it's not strictly what you'd expect someone who's into reggae necessarily. He wore makeup and he had big earrings, and his brother kind of found that quite strange. And he was, regarded as the freak in Brixton as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think he touches a little bit on this. There was,
because he was into Bowie,
where he saw the boundary, because he was like, he was that person in Brixton. But then when he started to hang out with Vivienne and Malcolm, and it was a much more kind of like chaps, leather, rubber. There was a line, and I think he said, "There's a line there that I kind of like, even for Brixton, even for who I am. There's a line there." And I found that really, really intriguing as someone who was clearly like pushing the boundaries of what's perceived as accepted and what's perceived as cool.
Can we talk about the last part of this documentary as well? Because Jeanette Lee was talking about him being, when they met, as being quite cocky and quite arrogant. And I think, with the confidence thing, I think there's that line that you cross. I don't think he crosses that necessarily, but I did laugh at the end, because the end you see him in his chair and he gets up out the chair, and on the back of the chair it says The Don. Oh. Obviously that whole kind of reference to the director, because obviously he's, a big filmmaker, big director, as well as being a musician and an actor, we should say, because he was in a film called Midnight Breaks, I think came out in the early 90s or late 80s, with Toy Wilcox and Robbie Coltrane. So I think that was the first role that he had as an actor. So he's done so many different things, but I quite like that kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect of that at the end of the documentary. I don't think he's cocky and arrogant necessarily. I think he's just really, really confident.
It depends how you perceive cocky and arrogant. I mean, in some ways, he's the real deal. he's managed bands, he's hung out with the kind of like all these famous, like he's the real deal. So in some ways, he's probably just self-assured. He's like, I'm kind of it. I've done it. You know, he's bona fide. He's the real deal. He doesn't need to be that kind of person. So he's just. I think he's just confident and self-assured because he's like,
in control, knows what he's doing. So, star rating, Sean. Over to you. First of all.
Oh gosh, it's a really high 4.
Yeah, it's a 4 for me as well. So it's a high 4 for you. So what's stopping you from that big 5?
Really hard marker, Phil. You know I'm a really hard marker.
That's what it is.
It's on the cusp of a 4 and a 5. 4.5. I want to make some new rules. High 4. It's a high 4.
You're absolutely right though about time just going, because I found it really fascinating and I just liked the pace of it because there was always something to engage you, and it was moving on from one thing to the other. It's like it went from, you know, obviously his childhood, and also the fact that we should say when he went to Jamaica, his eyes were opened completely. He thought he knew everything about his history and about his culture, and I think when he went to Jamaica he saw another side to that as well. So I found that fascinating too.
Very much so. Very much so. Like about a little bit like who you are as a person, you know, and how and who you identify with. And no, I thought that was I mean, I think it felt like a revelation.
Yeah. So it's called Rebel Dread, documentary about Don Letts. He is the spokesperson. He just owns this, but there is so much more to this than that. And him as well, because there's so many people involved in his life story. So there's a lot of other people that are involved in, you know, talking heads, like I said earlier. So yeah, fascinating music documentary. Check it out. I think it's been released this coming Friday in cinemas, but I'm sure it'll be online as well. Check all the details down below, all the links to how you can see it. And of course, our Boys on Film will be back soon to check out more films. And we've got the BFI Flair LGBTQ plus film festival in London happening soon.
We have indeed. It's all kicking off. Brilliant.
It is. Good to see you, Sean, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thanks everyone. Oh, did someone say, oh, there's a cat?
Right on cue. I'm glad we haven't got the back end. Are you still there? Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Look at that.
Hi. She basically stood straight on the power switch and turned the laptop off.
Oh,
I can't hear you. Okay.
Oh no. Have you got sound problems now? Christ. Can you hear me now? I can't hear you at all. And that whole kind of, you know... Oh! Was I boring you that much?
It literally just kicked me out for no reason. Just kicked me out.